Hey YouTube, today we're going to be looking at some 44 Magnums, but before we get started, I'm going to show you neither one of these revolvers have anything in them, and we are cleared to make this video. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to be talking about the Smith and Wesson 44 Magnums, the largest in-frame revolver. So I'm going to pick this one up and we'll show you what I have here. This is a Smith and Wesson 629-3, and I've showed this a few times and told you this is one of my favorite revolvers. So this particular one was made somewhere between 1989 and 1992, and I had a viewer tell me that he believes it was made in 1992, and I believe him. I just haven't done all the looking up with Smith and Wesson. They don't make it quite as easy to tell you what year they were made as the Colt revolvers do. But let me flip it over and show you the other side. It says 44 Magnum right here on the side. It has all the little Smith and Wesson stuff, where it was made and all that. It has walnut target grips on them with the little Smith & Wesson medallion on it. On the other side, it has the Smith & Wesson sign on the frame. Same medallion here, and on the side of the barrel, it says Smith & Wesson. So Smith & Wesson came out with the 44 Magnum in 1955, and they offered it in this large in-frame, and it was a blued version of it, and they later came out with nickel ones. Well, in 1978, they decided to release a stainless version. That's what this is. This is the stainless version of the in-frame, and they call it the 629. This one happens to be the 629-3, so this is the third variant of the 629. Now, what makes this one a little bit different, the majority of the Smith & Wesson 629s only had a half lug underneath it. So this underlug only went about halfway. And if you got them in the 6-inch configuration, I call it the 6-inch configuration, they were usually 6.5-inch barrels. They didn't make any of them hardly in 6-inch. This one happens to be a 6-inch. The majority of them were 6.5-inch with a half underlug, and this one here has an unfluted cylinder on it. So the cylinder doesn't have any flutes in it. It's smooth all the way across, and I think it looks pretty cool. Now, this one was called the Classic Hunter, and a viewer told me that they made these around 1992. There's not many of them out there in the wild, so this is kind of a rare form to see a Smith & Wesson 629 in. One of my favorites. It came from the factory with rubber Packmeyer grips on them, and I put the regular target stocks on them for the factory target stocks from the large end frames. Now, the topic of today is whether this gun's outdated or not. As we all know, I've been over this many times, Smith & Wesson is the one that came up with, invented, and was the first one to release the 44 Magnum in 1955. And it was deemed the most powerful handgun in the world. And the guy that said that was Dirty Harry. In all the movies, he carried the Smith & Wesson 629. He said it was the most powerful handgun in the world. And he was right up until, more modern times when some other guns have overtaken them. Now, why did they produce these other guns, and why did they overtake them? Well, one of the reasons that I believe, and this is all a theory, and I'd like to hear what everybody thinks about it, is the size of this frame. Now, this is a massive gun for its time. It was very large. When the end frame first came out, it was in the Model 27 or the registered Magnum and 357 Magnum. And when you looked at the cylinder, when they had this same frame with the 357 Magnum, it was a lot shorter, and there was a little gap here you could see through them. But they made this frame, it was the largest frame, and when they came out with the 44 Magnum, that's what they introduced it in. Well, when we fast forward into modern times, as with all these handgun calibers, they have all these super hyper large velocity, high pressure cartridges out now, like these Buffalo bores and all this stuff, and 44 Magnum. And this gun here is a little bit weaker than some of these new modern revolvers that they have, and this gun more than likely will stress out a little bit when you run a large dose of these really high velocity 44 Magnums through it. Now, when Ruger came out with their 44 Magnum, It was built a lot beefier. It was a cast frame, and it was built a lot beefier. It was built like a tank, and if you hold it next to one of these, there's a huge difference in them, and they claim that theirs will handle the buffalo bore stuff and all that stuff. Smith and Wesson does not claim that. Now, this being an older one, it's going to have older technology, older steel in it and stuff like that. I would not recommend running a steady diet of like heavy buffalo bore 44 magnums through this. Now, one of the things about this gun is it's a lot lighter than some of these newer ones. I'm going to compare it to one of these more modern ones here that I have here on the table here in a second. But it's a lot lighter, so you're going to have a lot more felt recoil in this. And 44 Magnum has quite a bit of recoil anyway, but when you start adding these super hot loads to them, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to control than maybe a lot heavier gun. So some of the features we're going to look on this is this top strap. If you look at how thin this top strap is, it's really in today's standards kind of a weakly made frame next to some of this more modern stuff for such a high pressure, high velocity, large caliber handgun revolver cartridge. And the forcing column looks pretty nice on it. It's pretty beefy on it. But what I would compare this to is like a K frame in a 357 Magnum. And if you know anything about these older pre-lock Smith and Wesson revolvers, the K-frame was, its main weakness was when you started shooting a heavy diet of 357 Magnums through it, you could start having problems with the forcing column or this top strap here that was a little thin on them. And that's why they came out with the L frame a little bit later. You know, the larger, a little bit larger that'll handle that steady diet of that 357 Magnum. Well, they've never came out with a larger frame 44 Magnum that was, you know, comparable to this. It would handle a steady diet of the 44 Magnum. And I think one of the things that other manufacturers did, they tried to come out with a more powerful cartridge. And the reason being is Smith & Wesson was the first one to have the 44 Magnum, and when you're very limited on what you can shoot, you know, back in the old days when there wasn't all this crazy ammo available, you know, you had to shoot what you had to shoot. You had to shoot regular 240 grain, you know, target loads or whatever they had out there in 44 Magnum, and it was very powerful and stuff. But there's the race to make the biggest cartridge in the world, and it's not hard to make a more powerful cartridge when you get into these larger calibers, these 460s and 454 Gasols and all that. Well, this frame just simply won't handle it, folks. This thing barely handles a 44 Magnum, so you can't really step it up. So a lot of these other gun manufacturers came out with these larger cartridges, and they dethroned the Smith & Wesson 29 or the Smith & Wesson 629 as the most powerful handgun in the world. Now, when you fast forward into today's times, all the 44 Magnums that you see, and this is a Colt Anaconda, this is one of the newer ones, have a lot beefier frame on them. So if you look right at this frame here, you see how much thicker this top strap is than Smith & Wesson. The cylinder is absolutely massive in size when compared to the Smith & Wesson 629 that I have here, and this one will handle anything that you put through it, folks. This thing is so beefy, just absolutely just a massive gun. I'll flip it over and show you the other side of this too. Everybody has seen now these new Colt revolvers, and this Colt Anaconda probably takes the cake for me for the newer Colt double action revolvers. They're just absolutely awesome, and they live up to the Colt name, and I think they did a fantastic job on it. So I'm going to show you some of the side-by-sides differences of what makes this such a massive gun, and as compared to this regular Smith & Wesson here. Now, if you open these cylinders up, and I'm going to do this carefully here, open these cylinders up, and if you show them side by side, it's not even close to the size of the cylinders. The cylinders is absolutely massive on the Colt, and this is true of most of the ones like the Rugers and all that. They have larger cylinders. If you look at this top strap here, let me see if I can flip this around and show you side by side the difference in the thickness here. This one is absolutely a lot larger, a lot thicker than the actual Smith& Wesson 629, which is the original 44 Magnum. So what they did, basically, they built a gun, these new modern people, that was a lot beefier and stuff like that, and you can amp up the ammo that you run through it and have a lot more powerful handgun, you know, and not have to worry about any frames cracking or anything like that on it. And essentially this could be considered, not really, but really considered a more powerful handgun. So in today's times, all this modern steel, modern technology, these things are absolutely unreal what they're doing to handguns today. You know, you can run this hot ammo through these things and not worry about any of the problems that you used to have back in the old days. I'll show you the forcing cone on this. If you'll see how much thicker this forcing cone is, and the Smith & Wesson, it's not even close, folks. Just technology's caught up with some of these old girls here, and that doesn't mean these are bad guns. And I absolutely love this gun. I mean, I love everything about it. It absolutely scratches my itch for the need for a Smith & Wesson older 44 Magnum. It's just a little bit lighter made gun than the newer Colts or the newer Rugers and all that, you know, in the 44 Magnum range. So you can't just take this thing out all day, every day, and just blast heavy doses of Magnums through it, or you could possibly run into some problems. Now, I've shot it quite a bit. I've never had any problems with it. I could just see to the weaknesses in the build quality of it. It's a very well-built gun, but I don't think that it will handle the type of ammunition that this newer Colt will, or a newer Ruger will, or anything like that. You know, any of these large caliber 44 Magnums. Now, what Smith & Wesson did do is they came out with the X frame, and I've showed that before. Have a 500 Magnum X frame, and they do not offer that in 44 Magnum to my knowledge, and it's it dwarfs both of these put together. It's a lot larger than this Colt Anaconda here, and that's saying a lot in how big this frame on this Colt Anaconda is. But anyway, folks, I just want to know if this Smith & Wesson 629 is outdated. I'm going to say it's not outdated, but it does not handle the type of new modern ammunition on a daily basis that some of these more modern guns will handle. But it's still a great classic gun, very well-made gun, very good-looking gun, and this particular one happens to be one of my favorite 44 Magnums. Let me know what you think. Do you think the 629 is outdated next to some of these new modern ones, or do you think it measures up to some of these modern guns? Thank you very much for watching my video today, folks, and you folks have a great day.